individuals in these regions, whether it's Europe, the Middle East, here in North America, they might start to look at how the government is impacting their personal lives. And this relates back to, questions surrounding the pandemic, questions surrounding their personal wealth, right? The value of their personal wealth, and how, for example, here in the United States, all of a sudden we're at the debt to GDP ratio is at 120%. We're suffering from inflation, and people are still working just as hard. We might see some kind of a movement closer to technology where a third pillar is built, where an individual might say, we're in this post-trust and post-truth moment. I don't trust, and I don't trust the government. I don't trust the media. I don't trust everything that I'm seeing on social media. And it's time for me to take care of my own possessions and use technology to move my property and move my possessions onto the blockchain with cryptocurrency in a portable way that's non-invasive from these entities that I might not trust anymore. And, it's kind of interesting when you look at that as it relates to people living under communist rule, but also people living right here in the United States.
Well, I do think universally, no matter where you are, there is this lack of trust in institutions and government. And that's, again, a very dangerous thing, because if I'm having to take matters into my own hands, and we have, many highly armed societies, you have the potential for the breakdown in law and order, and that puts everybody at risk. So I think that when we think about technology, whether that's social media and how we rely on it, or whether it's the banking system, one has to be thoughtful about how to restore at least a sufficient number of institutions that we can function. And so I understand why, people would move into crypto. That makes sense. I mean, it makes sense to me. On the other hand, a lot of, criminal organizations and other kinds of, some of these regimes we're talking about also use those markets. And so what's the lesson of that? The lesson of that is that we have money laundering rules that protect you from that in the banking system, in the regular banking system. And so, I understand the urge. You hear these stories about people who are tech billionaires, having space programs because they want to build, some kind of living space up on the moon in case things go bad here. Well, that's not, a good solution. We really need to really start seeking political leaders that have a vision about how to restore institutions. And I don't see that emerging yet in the United States, honestly. And that's a concern, right? Because that's really what's needed here is a real effort, especially to reform institutions. When you look at the subject of climate change and international debt, clearly the World Bank, which was, set up during the time of the Marshall Plan, needs to be completely restructured and reformed. They put out a paper on reform. I mean, that is what's been proposed is completely inadequate, right? So, how we set up the international global system, the fact that, truly, countries that were outside that system, whether you're talking about China or Russia, they've been trying to devolve that system, as part of their policy. But, the United States is not completely innocent in this thing. We've weaponized the financial system with our sanctions policies and other kinds of policies. So we really need to step back and look for a kind of a leadership that can restore our trust in the institutions we need by reforming those institutions. And if you think about Roosevelt and the New Deal or other times in history, that has happened, right? So it's not just a given that we're going down the path of world war and we're going to have crisis everywhere. I mean, with the right kind of leadership, we could have a restoration of institutions and a reform of institutions in a way that's more workable for all Americans, and in a way that, brings better prosperity in Europe and even in these countries where things are going badly. The Chinese could reform their system in a way that would make it more productive for its citizens. Let me add to that that in the Middle East, you've had reformers, and there have been fits and starts, but you have had diversification of economies in the United Arab Emirates, now in Saudi Arabia, with different focus, and that's a positive outcome for the populations there. So, how do we stay the course for that, and not get dragged down into monumental conflicts? You asked me, what do I think happens to the efforts at Middle East peace? I mean, I think because those countries have made, many countries in the Middle East have made good progress in, you know, diversifying their economies, or in the case of Morocco and some other countries, of moving to being a promising hub for clean energy. you know those countries and those populations need to stay the course and need to try to pursue peaceful outcomes. There's a long history of war tied to oil crises and oil crises tied to war, and we need to move away from that. We need to take this opportunity of a changing economy and enabling technology to get out of these paradigms of conflict.